in our center, etc. So psychedelics, glutamate system, etc. I'm not as, fluent there. Just excuse me for that.
That's
But,
okay.
genetics, but all the rest, I'm okay with.
Well, I'll start.
Okay?
We'll start recording, but the first thing, I guess the first question is, what do you want us to call you? Because our as officers, we go right to doctor. So what do you wish to be called?
Dr. Neria is okay? Or,
That's fine. We will call
yeah.
you. We will call you. Now we're both from the naval branches. Our medics and doctors, we always call Doc. So if we call you Doc, please don't take
That's
offense.
okay too. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
No problem.
It's cultural affinity, but in that we've started, we want to say first of all, what an honor it is to really have you here with us. Someone who, like us and a lot of our listeners, former officer, trained as a war fighter. Your experiences and your story are so amazing, and getting us to the point where you've dedicated a career based off that beginning experience that has helped so many and continues to reach out to so many, which is one of our missions that Brian and I have, that Ponch and I have here on No Way Out in our Substack, The World of Reorientation, is to understand PTSD and get people the help that they need. We're biased because we're also veterans, but also to the people that have experienced trauma in other ways. And there's first responders and 9/11 survivors and sexual assault and things like that. So we're so glad to have you here, Doc. It means a great deal. And maybe we could begin with painting the picture of your story as going into the Army, and your experiences there that have informed and inspired the rest of your career, and what you're widely known for other than PTSD. Maybe if you could help paint the picture for our audience.
Sure. It's great to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here and to speak to you today. So I was born to a military family, actually, in Israel, sometimes in the 50s. So it's about more than 70 years ago. Hard to believe, but that's the truth. My dad and my mother were both in the military as professional officers. My father was in the infantry. My mother she was a medic, and actually a very brave medic during the War of Independence, and grew up really hungry to one day to join the military. I remember that right after the 6 Days War, I was 14 or 15 years of age, and my father put a uniform on me and asked me to be his driver on the jeep, he was a battalion commander at the Golan Heights, and he offered me to drive his jeep, and nobody knew that a kid 14 or 15 years old, driving this jeep. And so just to give you a flavor of what a crazy family I was born to, and a father that took a lot of risk always in his life. I miss him dearly. He died 10 years ago, and actually yesterday was the anniversary for his death. So, and I joined them. I wasn't a good student in high school, in fact, and but always thought that things would be okay. And I joined the military, and I was screened for a special ops unit, and failed, the screening, and and was asked to join the armor forces, and did it happily. And I became a tank driver first, and very quickly a tank commander, and very quickly go to officer training, became a commander, a lieutenant, and then as the deputy platoon commander, went to the Yom Kippur War at the north side of the Suez Canal, where the Egyptians, the IDF, on October 6, 1973, and I was
21.
there.
You're 21
really.
at this point. You're 21 years old at this point.
I was 21, exactly, and I was I was part of this very difficult times for 12 days until I was injured, severely injured and evacuated. And those 12 days when I was 21 really shaped my life forever. I'm sure you guys, Ponch and Moose, can understand it, how, few days, of combat can throw us to almost like a different existence and shape everything that we do after or feel after, those days. Yeah.
Talk us through, so 12 days. When you read what's available about you on the internet, I'd love to hear it in your own words of what that was actually like, as a leader, and imagine that you had to inspire people that were with you, people that were under you, working as a team. Talk us through that from that perspective of how the
Yeah. So I appreciate the opportunity. It's only 12 days, but I can talk about it for like an entire, night. I'm very much into the details, of what happened to us, but basically, I have been through experiences where, battalion, full, armored tank battalion Patton, by the way, Patton tanks, M60, M48, I think, was completely destroyed in less than 24 hours, um, which made me looking for another unit, kind of, the second day of the war, joined this unit through, after I was particularly, had to deal with bringing back everybody that survived this combat of the first day and night. So I was going again and again to places where I thought my tank crews can be still found, and put them on my tank, almost like a truck. I used my tank almost like a truck, like a pickup truck, in order to take people outside of the combat zone during night. And the Egyptians were there already, and they didn't notice that this is an Israeli vehicles that moving back and forth in order to rescue crew members who were still alive. And we left, some of the tanks either in the swamps there, or those tanks that were already heated and destroyed, and some of them were on fire. But anyhow, my mind was to rescue as many, young kids under my command to back, 2-3 kilometers. And so I did that. And in addition to fighting at the beginning quite a bit, and then I was able to join another unit to participate in more battles. My tanks were destroyed a couple of times. I changed a number of tanks, with always like new crew members under my command. And I am, and eventually positioned in a company commander role after 3 days in a complete different unit that were most successful to stay alive and cohesive, with the great, leadership of the battalion commander. So let me just, instead of going into detail, let me just tell you that my main lesson of those days, is that you have to fight the enemy, but you also have to be very conscious about not to get bad advice or bad commands from superiors. So I was kind of the middle, really filtering out as much as I can what other people tell me what to do, and me deciding what to do in order to stay alive, to stay safe, and to defend my people from bad decisions, bad requests coming from above. I think that, so my psychology was, how can I gain enough independence and enough space, to operate more safely? So it's true that, I got, and you're gonna, I'm sure, ask me about it. So how did you get this, medal of bravery that you got? And my answer will be, it's not because I was crazy. I was kind of suicidal. No, I was under control and kind of filtering out and digesting well what's going on around me.
Well, that
I
ties
hope
in
this was
perfect.
clear. I know. Yeah.
That really does pivot nicely into the work that we do, and what I think we're gonna build so many bridges with you on. One technical question: in those 12 days, did you sleep?
So very little, very little, sometimes in some crazy way. So for example, the worst, bombardment that we got do you remember the Russian weapon Katyusha? The Katyusha thing? Katyusha was kind of mortar machine
Hmm.
that's throwing on you dozens and dozens of like
Okay.
little missiles at the same time, so they have these like 6 or 12, things that they throw on you, like, like this mortar and whatever, named Katyusha. This is like a Russian name. And awful, awful sound, terrible risk, really awful. And I was sleeping like a baby, you know, on the tank, but outside of the turret. So I slept when I could. I slept, during like crazy circumstances. But yeah, I didn't feel the fatigue so much. I was so much with so much adrenaline
Mm-hmm.
and so I felt other things, but fatigue, not so much.
What I love about when you talk about not being suicidal or crazy when it came to being a recipient of the Medal of Valor, which for our American listeners is the equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Honor and has only been awarded. You're one of 40 people that have ever been awarded this decoration. Your answer, and Ponch, did you pick up on it? Doc, your answer was, I kept shattering my correspondence of reality, and I kept revising and updating my situation so that you weren't. It seems to me like you were fighting against biases or training or whatever. You were dealing with reality as it was, and you were updating your cognitive operating system,
Right.
which in turn shaped how you sensed, how you decided, how you acted, how you learned, in order that you could thrive and improve your capacity for free and independent action.
Absolutely. And that's why I am alive today. I was alive after the war. Exactly that.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's for again, for the things that we talk about, that really does lay a phenomenal foundation. Now, you you get past that, and I want to ask about your transition into becoming a clinician, a scholar on PTSD, and I guess there's a parallel path that you're still in the reserves, and you were called back to war again 9 years later, and you've been involved in other things. Now, walk us through that transition of what was the inspiration from that, and how did you get through the next 9 years?
So the inspiration was very much related to my emotional wounds after the war. Like many, many others, I came back with the need to deal with my own trauma, with my big questions about myself. How did I function? Whether I deserve to be a hero, and in Israel, it was a big thing that I got this medal of Valor because, during the Yom Kippur War, there were only 8 people that got the Medal of Valor. 4 of them were dead already, so only 4 of us. And we had to be interviewed about that, a lot of press, a lot of admiration. And for me as a young kid, I had to ask myself, do I deserve it? Is it the right thing that that happened to me. And so I got into a lot of kind of soul searching and trying to understand who I am, what should I do? And also in a way trying to understand generations before me, my parents that very likely had PTSD as well from their combat experience. And, the generation of Holocaust survivors who were coming to Israel with a lot of emotional wounds. So for me, it was very natural to pick on psychology and clinical understanding of myself and others. But I always thought that I had a role, and that's something that I think perhaps you can understand it as a group of young people who are trying to accomplish of kind of a societal role in what you are doing with your podcast, your kind of intellectual advantage. It was also true for me. What is it that I should become to or do? And luckily, I have great mentorship in Israel that kind of pointed me to do both writing. I published a book which became kind of a bestseller in Israel it was a war doco. It was about my war experiences, but written as a novel, as a war novel, and helping me really to shape my ideas about war and peace, about, my expectations towards, my military leaders and political leaders and my disappointments, and kind of a typical kind of come to age type of writing. But then I moved to research, and in particularly, I try to understand severe trauma, extreme trauma, and PTSD in combat veterans and prisoners of wars in Israel. That's what kind of set me up on the field of PTSD initially. We don't hear you, Moose.
Sorry. So that book was called Fire, correct?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the English, was that ever published in English?
No, no. It's translated, never published in Israel.
Okay. No, I'd love
Never
to.
published abroad. In this country yet.
Well, hopefully that would be something wonderful. I can come to mind of things I've heard of, like war novels like Fields of Fire that a lot of our audience would be familiar with by James Webb, and some other of those sorts of memoirs.
Fire has like dual or triple meaning, right? Fire is both, the command, the order that you give your people to, to shoot, right? And so he said, to your crew member, he said, to the gunner, he said, fire. And then they need to shoot, but also fire is, is what happened to me and to so many people, and that our vehicles, army vehicles, caught on fire when heated. And so I got back home with need to deal with burns, and other, injuries. So, but there is also fire on the positive sense that there is fire in my soul, to do the right thing, right? We are fired up, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the triple meaning of that.
So by the time you got to the next war in Lebanon, and now you were a battalion commander?
Yeah, I was a battalion commander, right?
How were you applying those lessons and those things that you were starting to explore around trauma and everything? How did that inform your leadership as an officer at that level in that fight?
I know that's really, so I had yet to have my PhD then. So this is 82. I was 30 years old. young battalion commander with my previous war experiences really very fresh in my mind. And once again, guys, my main commitment was, how can I stay alive and keep my battalion under control, right? Against the craziness around me. So that's what also connects to the trauma of the previous war, because I was so sick and tired of military officers who are irresponsibly and and take their and take their military units to all sorts of um you know unresponsible missions that are going to be ended bad. So I was very much you know trying to be on control, and it's proven right. I mean, I was again pretty cautious. I mean, I was fierce. I mean, it's not that I was weak. I felt emboldened to do the right thing military, even better than the previous war, because my position was a little bit higher with more control. I mean, a battalion commander in the IDF, I don't know whether it's comparable to what you guys know in the military here, but it's quite an independent, there is some independence, and because it's a military formation, they that can operate more independently. I felt I so I think I did well. I know that I did pretty well. Politically, I had a problem with this war. By the way, I didn't ignore the political complications. I wasn't clear whether entering to this country, to Lebanon. I'm talking about 82, about what, 50 years ago or more, that this was the right thing to do. But I was loyal. I was loyal to my guys and to the militaries. I did that nevertheless. But again, I I tried to be as cautious, as moral, as a fine leader as I could.
How did you, having been through war already, having been decorated at the highest level,
And also injured. I was a disabled veteran.
and a disabled,
I got disability from the Israeli VA already as well.
yeah, and then Yom Kippur War, having such, because you talk about this in your professional work, how there is such
Right.
cultural collective PTSD about this. How was it, as now the senior officer in command of a battalion? How did you take steps? What things did you do to mentor or coach those that were brand new, that had never been in combat, that had never been
Oh
in
yeah, no,
war?
that's a good question. I mean, that's, by the way, why I was, joining the military again as a reservist. I love that. I love the fact that I have 400 kids, under my command, that I can train them appropriately. I can mentor them, the company commanders. And also it's a little bit childish, guys, but I love the tanks. I love driving this vehicle. I love shooting from this vehicle. I love driving jeeps. It's like, so there is war, and war is terrible, but there is a daily life of the military that are so enjoyable. And, so I got a little bit trapped in that because of my childish personality.
That's awesome. What were some of, what would be some of the things then, to embolden or encourage people that had not been there and you had been there, like what were some of the things that you would take into consideration when emulating or modeling or mentoring them, as you say?
Being professional, being as professional as you can, knowing how to be a good soldier, being fair, being honest, being transparent, being loyal to the people around you and under you, being being honest in your reports to your superiors. I mean, I always and also it's true, as a lab director in the university for so many years, it's the same values. I mean, keep it honest. It's not about it's not about it's a collective effort. It's not about individually here and there. We are together. Let's define the mission. Let's work together as a unit towards accomplishing the mission. So this model of being within a group, leading a group, is what kind of made my life, pretty effective until this point.
So now let's pivot into the work that you've been known for since, and let's start there really, because the things that you just described, when you think of strict but fair, mission, camaraderie, unit cohesion, patriotism, love of vehicles. I mean, Ponch loves jets and I love cannons. I mean, I still do.
Yeah.
What do you think what effect does that, maybe let's start with that as we get into the discussion of trauma and PTSD. What those things that make the military what it is and give us this sort of cognitive operating system that we carry with us for the rest of our lives that many people do not have, that have never been there. What trauma comes from that when veterans leave the military and they transition into the world, the civilian world? Or is that some of the places that really attack the mind and feelings and sense making of a vet when they transition?
So this is really the $1 million question, right? What really drives the emotional consequences of the trauma? The trauma is the experience itself. It's not the result. It's not the consequences. So the way I see it is that during operational phase, especially if it's repeated, think about special ops or the Marine experience that you're familiar with, where a unit is Navy SEALs, when the unit is really experience trauma again and again in different formats, different pressure points, there is really a point where the brain is not so effective in processing those experiences, especially if they are repeated and ongoing and involve injury, death, loss of life of others around you, And so perhaps during the experience, you are okay with that. You are slightly numb. You are very focused. Adrenaline is high. But then, the question is how far the brain can go in order to process difficult experiences. And difficult experiences can be, for example, not being effective, blaming yourself that you didn't do things the right way. And things that happen to you that contradict your moral compass, contradict your values. Things that happen to you because you were not effective in stopping things that should have been stopped, right? And you wasn't effective in order to stop them. So, or a sense of being abandoned, being betrayed, being misled. So those are the things that put you in a place that when you come home, and especially without the social support of your peers and your friends, you suddenly alone and need to deal with it. Now, if you are an older guy already with family and kids and a wife, a spouse, and suddenly there is a pressure, about going back to things that perhaps lost meaning for you a little bit, then our brain really is not able to do what the brain was doing before until a certain point, processing experiences the right way. And then, you see those cracks. People stop being able to sleep well. People are using drugs, especially marijuana, alcohol, in order to sleep better, but that makes them dependent. Depression is kicking in, and big questions becoming very central. What about me? Am I a failure? Am I getting crazy? So, and if you delay, getting help, professional help for too long, and pretty soon, you can get into severe trouble, really, emotionally, and stop being functional and stop being responsible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You brought up meaning, how important is meaning in your work? Because I think of, like, when I think of, again, looking at it as a veteran, the meaning, the duty, the sacrifice, the command of other people, the camaraderie and the bond with other people, that provides a lot of meaning. And I wonder if a lot of men and women that transition out, that's what they're still searching for. They're still trying to find the meaning that they had when they were part of a cohesive unit, part of something coming together, sacrificing together, transforming together.
So one of the most important books about meaning and the impossibility of meaning making after trauma is a book written by an Italian Jewish guy named Primo Levi, who came back from Auschwitz to his Italian town and couldn't draw a good meaning of what happened to him, because and the name of the book is This a Man? So this is a man, right? I mean, what type of manhood, what type of humanity or lack of humanity he has seen. So if you are and eventually, this guy, this famous author, really also ended his life in an accident that many thought looked more like a suicide than an accident, because he was asking himself, what did I see? I see people, fighting for a piece of bread and cheating each other and lying to each other and stealing from each other. I see how people are submissive to evil power, and I see people changing their moral code, so easily. Is this, a group of people that I can be part of, And so I don't compare every trauma with the trauma of the Holocaust, especially in Auschwitz or Birkenau. But what I'm saying is that many of our fellow veterans that are not able to recover from PTSD, and I'm not speaking about complete recovery. I mean, all of us are staying with memories and some guilt feelings and some bad days and good days. That's normal. That's okay. But still, going to the office and taking care of our kids and spouses and friends, and live more or less meaningful life. But for those of us, and you see them in the VA centers, and you see them in other places, you see them in Israel, in Europe, in the US, people who become more chronic cases of PTSD, people who are bitter and angry and blaming and hate themselves and hate everybody else, who are people that were not able to restore their identity as societal people, who completely lost trust in everything around them and in themselves, because they have experienced extreme experience that are not digestible so much anymore. And especially if they don't get treatment on time, and being able to, draw the right meaning or to reframe what they have experienced.
That reframing, that reorienting, I mean, that's one of the things that we
Exactly.
talk about in that John Boyd, if you look at his OODA loop sketch, that's, it's ultimately through destruction and creation. What he's trying to get us to do is to destroy mental models and create new ones. Ponch, I know you're chomping at the bit to get in on this because you've got a lot to say on this.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think this is a question that a lot of folks want to have answered in my community. How is it that, let's say the three of us are in a tank crew, we experience a horrific event, and it only impacts moose, right? How can you help people understand that even though we may have shared an experience, that may impact one of us different? And it's not right or wrong, but can you help people understand why that is through your work?
No, thank you for the question, Punch. And I know that you're an aviator, and it is my sense, at least, that questions of resilience and superb functioning, versus perhaps breaking down under pressure. It's very much things that you guys try to sort out. I'm in this business of doing research on exactly those questions. What are really the factors that will determine who among us, or who among any group of people, will develop ultimately symptoms, and who are those who don't. So let me share with you. It's a little bit based on research, or mostly based on research, but a little bit also speculative, and perhaps can guide research down the road. So first of all, I do believe that there is a limit, or even a breaking point, for anybody or everybody. Depends on the amount of pressure and trauma that will be put on us. So it's not that some people are like ultimate heroes or resilient people that will never break down. Even those people who are, the strongest among us, even those people with enough lack of sleep, enough pressure, enough fatigue, enough trauma, will eventually break down under the pressure and will need help, right? So that's the ultimate model. However, people are different from each other in when exactly this point is identified or located, right? And as I said before, we are built differently. We have different histories, different experiences, different models. We are also coming to face difficulties in a different way. Sometimes we are well rested and ate well or slept well the night before, and sometimes we are not. We are easily confused. We don't have enough resources in our body, etc., etc. So this variety, this variance among us has a lot to do with how we will respond when bad things happen to us. First. Second is that the capacity of the computer in our head, Chris, the brain, is it's not limitless. We don't expect that our brain can process everything that is thrown on it. So take, for example, prisoners of wars, right? So I've did a big study comparing prisoners of wars to those to combatants from the same units, army units, we've experienced exactly the same thing before captivity happened. So I controlled experience in this study. And what I found is that prisoners of war, because they experienced trauma in a very interpersonal way, they faced cruelty and difficulties and lack of sleep and lack of identity, all of that, very differently. Eventually, some of them really broke down more easily that combatants without captivity experience. So the nature of the trauma is also very, very important. What really happened to you and what did you do eventually? And then comes the homecoming period that I think Moose asked before, that the most sensitive, period is whether when you came home, what happened to you then? Whether there was somebody there, either your team, your peers, your family, psychologists, the VA system, I don't know what, that were there for you, making you more comfortable, to move on in your life when you are not in the military anymore. And think about suicide, for example, in the Marine Corps or in any other, special ops units. It's always happened when those kids, when those young guys are left by themselves to deal with awful memories, really. Self-doubt, self-blame, depression, deep pain. Pain is really taking over, like physical pain, deep, deep pain. And there is nobody there that can understand and share and be shared, when they can't deal with it anymore and they feel stuck, right? So availability of the right support, of the right help in those very particular, times is really crucial to mental health.
I want to make sure I have this right. It's not necessarily the experience, but it's the reaction or the emotion that we carry that's associated with the experience, right? Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's
So
not experience.
right,
No,
but it's the emotion that's connected to it. So because we had a traumatic experience, that doesn't mean we're going to have PTSD. Am I saying that correctly?
exactly. And so just imagine that in your brain you have the memories, it's a computer, memories in your hippocampus. And the memories can be associated with emotions, but not necessarily. And in fact, our mission is disconnect the memories from the emotions, emotion of guilt, emotion of self-blame, emotion of grief, So the role is to enable the process of disconnected emotions from the memories. And if we don't do that, each time that memory is coming to surface, it will come with with terrible emotions that eventually can put so much pressure on the human being, right? That's what needed to be done in treatment, really. And that's why it's very important that the treatment will be directly focused on the traumatic accounts and the memories that are related to it in order to be able to really kind of dissociate emotions from these memories.
And is that what you call the power to forget? Not just the power to remember, but
Yeah,
also having the
exactly.
power to forget? Yeah.
Yeah, the power to forget, the imperative of forgetting. Forgetting, this is not in Alzheimer, forgetting is a bad thing. In PTSD, forgetting is a great thing.
It's interesting. I mean, this type of discussion, even that we're having, has evolved so much over, say, 100 years or so, where at some point people would say, "Oh, they were just shell shocked," or "Oh, they just had their,
They didn't get it when they said it. They really didn't get it.
yeah." How far? Where do you when you look at today? I mean, clearly we're a lot further ahead, but it still seems to me like we have a long way to go still.
But we did a lot. So I think the early 80s where people eventually got it, after the Vietnam War, they got what PTSD means.
Hmm.
They got the idea that PTSD may be a normal reaction to abnormal situation. This is when, clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, and veterans and understood what happened to multiple generations before us that were blamed as weak, as cowards, as I don't know what, and hospitalized or left, early 80s, kind of, late 70s in the US, especially on the Northeast, Boston areas, where really you could have identified the change. However, 50 years or 45 years later, what I think is missing still is progress on two things. First of all, understanding that PTSD is kind of an umbrella, group of symptoms that is very heterogeneous, and one size doesn't fit all. One size of treatment doesn't fit all. For example, just to give you like a very, very simple example, and I'm sure you can look at yourself and your friends in order to quickly screen for the implication of what I'm going to say, is that PTSD can be seen more like an anxiety sometimes, the hyperarousal, the anxiety, especially early stages after, and very different from PTSD that looks more like a depression, a lot of guilt, heaviness, you are detached from yourself, from society, a lot of guilt feelings, you feel stuck, you feel like a failure. This is very different from a PTSD in the early ages, where you basically anxious, cannot fall asleep, cannot concentrate, and all of that, right? There is very little effort. I mean, we have done it scientifically at Columbia, but there is very little effort to look for different treatments for different conditions of PTSD. And when you group everybody together and give them one treatment, like prolonged exposure, in the VA, you miss a lot of variants. And that's why you get that 50-60% of the people don't respond to the treatment because they don't have the same disorder to start with. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the right diagnostics and the right definition should lead to different treatments. That's first. Second, we were very much behind developing good treatments. Psychedelics is a perfect example for that. There is a lot of promise with psychedelic. Where have we been in the last 30, 40, 50 years with psychedelics? We did nothing. We did nothing. And we knew that LSD can work a little bit more or better than we thought. We knew that psilocybin works pretty well. Certainly MDMA has a lot of promise, with all the taboos and the stereotyping, and FDA, abandoned psychedelic altogether. We have lost so many years of progress in this area.
Yeah, we agree. And, you've looked at our episodes and, that we've had a lot of people come on and discuss psychedelics. Most recently, we had Dr. Nico Grunman, who's a physician that runs Ember Health, which is a ketamine IV clinic here in the city. You and I are both here in Manhattan. And he came and he talked about ketamine therapy, how they were using it originally as an alternative to anesthesia in combat situations. Right. And then they're realizing that it actually was a way to help mitigate depression, reduce suicidal ideations and that kind of thing. And, it hits hard because
ketamine is a lot of promise for PTSD, for depression, even for addiction in a very interesting way.
Yeah, well,
Hey, Doc, I'm wondering this.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering about this. Going back to resetting, disconnecting the event and the emotion, resetting that, if you will, that process is no different than the process we need to go through as a culture, going back to your point about psychedelics and how we kind of took 30 years and just threw it away because we stopped doing that. So this is a kind of a fractal thing, right? We need to go back and run a counterfactual, a what if scenario. What if these things actually look like? And if we do it this way, if we see this event and disconnect that emotion from that event, that traumatic event, that's no different than what you just said. That's what I'm hearing. So the way
no, absolutely.
Okay.
I think psychedelics have promise I'm talking very generally here. I'm not an expert in psychedelics. I'm reading, the literature, and I'm really hopeful about it, but I'm not an expert. But I think psychedelics have two main effects with relation to trauma. And that's true for ketamine, that's true for MDMA, that's certainly true for psilocybin. I don't know enough about LSD, so I can tell you, but psychedelics facilitate a more rich, more truthful inner observation and inner discussion about what happened in my life, right? And how should I see that? Whether I am right to think that I'm completely fucked, I have no reason to live, I am to be blamed on everything and anything, or I can look at my life, I can look at myself with more compassion, with more love, with more understanding, and open myself to a more positive outlook about myself and also about the people around me, especially with MDMA. So that's one thing that psychedelics can offer, and no other psychiatric drug is able to offer. And that's, sertraline or paroxetine or any SSRIs will not give you this state of mind. This is really what psychedelics, in a very amazing way, offer human beings, is to see themselves differently, to feel themselves differently, to feel the world around them differently, in a way that they will be and change perspective. And that's why they can be also effective in addiction, because addiction, think about it. I mean, you use drugs in order to treat addiction, but not treating it on the physical addiction, treating it on the mind that needs to use those drugs in order to feel better. So if you can stop drinking alcohol because you understand where you're coming from and what you really need, that's fantastic. More than that, I mean, neuroimaging studies are showing us that psychedelics can be very effective in kind of rebooting the brain, rebooting circuits, kind of refreshing almost, brain circuits in a way that it's not only about what you feel, it's also what your brain can enable you down the road, right? So if that's the case, perhaps you need much less talking therapy now, particularly if you are stuck and repetitive and going in circles all the time, and do it, with the support of some psychedelics, then your talking can be much more meaningful and more positive about yourself.
The features that you identified with psychedelics, and I'll inner observation. To me, it doesn't need to be psychedelics. It could be a pet. It could be yoga. It could be meditation. It could be something. And you pointed out that there are no known, I guess, SSRIs or even benzos or anything like that allow you to do that inner observation.
Right.
Another, taking it, kind of going off course away from psychedelics for a moment. If we take those features that you identified, how might that connect to working out or getting a dog? Or I think you do some work with animals as well. Like, how can
Equine
those
therapy,
help you? Yeah. How do those address those features that you just identified as being what we need to do, which is the inner observation?
Right. So again, and guys, I mean, you ask me really tremendous questions, and you can see that some of them allow me to reassess and to reevaluate my scientific observations. First of all, about working out, that's a must. That's not even a question whether it's recommended or not. I mean, if you want not only to live longer, to live better, but also to maintain some balance of your emotional system, of your cognitive system, working out, doing long walks, doing weights, doing cardio. I mean, that's a must. I mean, I mean, I wouldn't even argue anymore about that. There is so much scientific evidence to support it. And that can be a difference between somebody who preoccupied with suicidal thoughts versus somebody who are less preoccupied. Okay, so that's about physical exercise. Animals. I mean, there is a lot to say about animals. I'm a great fan of nature in general and animals in particular, particularly dogs and horses. And the reason I'm faithful about it and so much inspired by this thing is that it's, if you look at those two creatures, those two species, horses and dogs, they were the only species that kind of made a decision very early on to join human beings in their lives. Dogs came out of the woods. Horses came back from, I don't know, deserts and savannas and wherever, and offer themselves to human beings in their journeys, whatever the journey is. Now, sometimes humans took advantage of it, or many times, and being unfair to those amazing creatures. But it is my sense that there is a very deep way why we feel good with our dogs, pets, and why we can be so positively influenced by equine, by horses. Now, my team at Columbia and perhaps my buddy, Matt Rivera, will talk about it more in detail. My team at Columbia developed the first of its kind treatment manual for PTSD for veterans in the US and published the data in serious scientific journals, where we have seen that 8 weeks of group therapy of veterans, men and women, in a protocol that we built on the ground, not even mounting on horses, can do amazing things. So people with chronic PTSD that I described before that are not responsive anymore to anything that the VA offer them. And you can see PTSD and depression dropping down significantly. There is something with horses. Horses are very similar to people with PTSD. They are hypervigilant. They are easily afraid. They are obsessed with safety. Horses are prey animals, always on the guard. They interact, they get people with PTSD right away. And then if you walk between the two on bonding and on coordinated efforts, starting from cleaning the horse or cleaning the hooves, all the way leading the horses, joining the horses, you can see an amazing effect that are going directly to the brain, because we don't talk about trauma when we prescribed equine therapy for PTSD. We don't talk about the abuse or whatever, sexual abuse, or combat trauma. And you can see an amazing effect that it's on hormonal level, etc. Yeah, and those are the ways to get, and that's a response to you, Ponch, that this is how we move the attention, our attention patterns, from being preoccupied with our own pain to something outside, that we don't need or to speak about the pain, to feel the pain all the time. Physical exercise and bonding with human beings, bonding with animals are the best.
How easy is it though? It seems like people tend to fall into the trap of drugs. I guess
Yeah.
our culture, largely being driven, at least marketing, with pharmaceuticals. But I was thinking of another thing as you were talking, we're thinking about, dogs and horses. One of the things that, if you've ever seen on YouTube, there's bazillions, millions of hits on soft white underbelly, and they interview all sorts of people like crack addicts and heroin junkies and porn stars and strippers and hookers and things like this. And almost all of them, as they tell their story, almost all of them have some manner of trauma, like some kind of traumatic experience. And rather than having a dog or a horse or psychedelics or whatever, they dealt with their trauma through vice, or they dealt with it through illegal drugs, or they dealt with it through, a life that would be, considered by most, amoral or whatever. But it really seems that it can go the opposite way if you don't treat it correctly, right? I mean, it can really go south quickly.
Because people are looking for relief.
Mm.
We talked about the emotional pain before. People are looking for relief. Will do everything. They will take cocaine or even harder drugs. They will drink to their, in an unlimited way. They cannot stop smoke marijuana. They will be addicted to sex or to social media or whatever, because they are looking for relief in their inner pain, in their self-blame, sense of failure, anger, feeling of being abandoned, being betrayed. Those are really and it's so repetitive and it's so common, unfortunately. Yeah, it is what it is. If we don't, so that's why trauma is so common among people who struggle. It's many times about trauma. And that's why it's not only PTSD, as you suggest. It can be depression without PTSD. It can be addiction without PTSD.
What
It
about
can be depression
schizophrenia?
and addiction with PTSD.
What about something like, we both live in Manhattan, and you walk through Penn Station and you see people having arguments with the air, or
Yes.
they're fighting the air, and they're clearly maybe schizophrenic. Is that some kind of another response to trauma, is schizophrenia?
I think schizophrenia, bipolar illness is a different story.
Okay.
I mean, psychiatrically. It's an option for the brain to get completely out of order, and mostly about genetic stuff. And trauma can accelerate the pace many times, but it's not necessarily singularly related to the trauma, as we discussed before about our area of research.
I'm curious. People say that we have a mental health crisis globally and here in the United States. And then you look at the access that my kids have to what's going on around the world. They could see live events or events that are recorded, traumatic events. So vicarious trauma, can we, even though you and I didn't experience something that happened somewhere around the world, but we watched the video of it, can that create trauma? Is that possible?
To a small extent, particularly if you have the risk factors of previous trauma of yourself or trauma that you didn't deal with. And so social media can, or, the screens can bring back to you. So, I don't want to overgeneralize and to over scare people so much. I mean, addiction to social media is bad anyway, but in order to develop PTSD because you have seen an awful, gruesome video, it can happen if you have enough risk factors, that can accelerate this exposure.
I want to go someplace that.
But in general, before we move on, people are very resilient. 70, 80% of people who will experience any trauma, even October 7 in Israel, 80% of them will never forget what they have seen or experienced, but eventually overcome it. You can see it again and again in all our studies that most people able to rebound quite effectively to what happened to them. So each time is about 20, 25% of people that, met their limits and need to be taken care of.
Doc, I want to touch on a sensitive issue, and the way I bring it up, please, I want to put a caveat there to our listeners that this is my perspective, and I may be wrong on this. Years ago, I was involved with a documentary on PTSD and psychedelic assisted therapy, targeting the military aviation community. One of my jobs that I self-selected for was to reach out to find our sisters in arms that flew, female pilots, women combat pilots, and ask them to join this conversation. What I discovered in those conversations is I don't know, I'll just give you a phrase that I heard. Hey, Ponch, the trauma I have isn't from combat, it's from sexual assault.
Right.
And that just floored me because I wasn't expecting that, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? And I think this is very important that there's three males on this episode right now. We've got to address this. And Doc, do you mind?
No, of course. And thank you for bringing it up. Sexual assault are very common in the military, particularly towards women, but not only. There are a lot of male service members that experience all sorts of traumatic sexual experiences that against their will, but it's very common among our female, service members, and that's so bad. I'm saying that because I've seen, in our veteran center at Columbia, we have seen that again and again. What you just said, Ponch, that those accounts from survivors that can compare to any other traumatic experience and say this sexual violence is the most horrific one. And first of all, I want to explain why. And because it's almost always entail a sense of betrayal. You are always assaulted by people who you think need to protect you. Either it's military commanders or it's peers, that you trusted them, you thought they look at you equally and any other team member, and at some reason they betray this code and attack, either the weakest member or the female member, because it's not only about sex, certainly not about sexual desire or sexual intimacy, which is an acceptable and admired thing to have in life. It's about inflicting pain and power and all of that. So that's common, and it always involves, as I said, a betrayal of trust and betrayal of leadership, and it's changed dramatically how you can see other people in your environment. I mean, if you need to protect yourself from it's in the family, right? For kids and for adolescents, it always like, cousin, even a father that betray their duty to be responsible, human partners and attack the kid or the female. So, or within, domestic environment. So what I would like to say that it's so there is a sense of that, and then it's about somebody really violate your body, So I told you guys that I did this huge study on POWs, and the worst form of torture was not being beaten up, or sometimes, really beaten up, awfully starved, humiliated. The worst type of violence in captivity is that when your captors sexually molested the prisoners, and that's the worst trauma. So it's traumas vary in severity. So sexual violence is probably the worst form of traumatization, and that's why it always, you always see about 80% or so of people who experience rape and severe sexual violence to develop psychopathology, especially depression and PTSD after the exposure.
When the work that you were doing over there with the POWs, just to kind of to stay in this, because the militaries have evolved, that we are not only a band of brothers, we're a band of brothers and sisters.
Right.
Israel's been, from my observation, it seems that Israel has a much different way that they've integrated women into their force than in the United States.
Yeah, it's funny. It's true. It's true. Moose, we don't. I mean, inflicting sexual violence on females in the military is not so common in Israel. What is more common is less extreme forms of like bad, relationships or whatever, treating treating women in the military as kind of servants, or but the female war female soldiers in Israel, everybody you know is going to the military. All men and women age 18 are going to the military. So you don't see a lot of involuntary sexual experiences, which is good. In this country, in the US, it's more frequent, and it's coming with a lot of emotional scars to our female veterans, unfortunately. And it's funny that it's really funny, or it's surprising for me, I would say, that there is not enough enforcement of just stop it. It's unacceptable. It's awful. How can a big system like ours is not more effective in punishing people who are involved in that, in, just stopping that? It's beyond me, to tell you the truth.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's such a, what do you think would be, so, we started before we were recording about the things that the IDF has inspired, the Marine Corps, and that John Boyd, our guy, studied. In that respect, what do you think is the biggest lesson, the takeaway of like the integration of females into the force, to that the Israelis seem to be much better at than we have? What do you think is the big differentiator of why we have not done it as well?
I think here you do better in terms of integrating females in combat. I mean, the number of aviators, the number of combat medics, females are everywhere in the American military. In Israel, it's still not that. I think we are still more, perhaps in the IDF, a little bit more sexist, or more, or more, we don't see a lot of female pilots or combat pilots, as you see in this country. Helicopter pilots, you don't see it enough in the Israeli military. But it's true that, what we said before, that there is, I don't know, I mean, there is a sense of empowerment that I think female soldiers experience or feel in the IDF, that perhaps protects them better and makes them more equal in a way.
Interesting. Well, Doc, I think we could go for hours. There's so many areas we want to connect the dots on, and even specifically dig more into the science. One of the things that
we have not done.
Well, one of the things that Ponch and I say a lot to guests is somebody knows everything about John Boyd's theories without knowing anything about John Boyd's theories, because the intersection is so powerful. But from the concept that we talk about continuously about orientation, and understanding the orientation as prime, and our cognitive software is so important. I mean, you've not only reinforced that, but hopefully we're mutually finding ways to take things in different directions, and keep working together and talking about these things together. Ponch, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speak. I'm looking forward to speak more in the future. So
Absolutely.
I'm around, you're around, you're doing a terrific job.
Thank you.
Let's talk more someday.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're gonna end the recording here. But Dr. Yuval Neria, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing that with us, and sharing your stories and your work with our audience.
Happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.